Hello, welcome to Venture Capital. I'm Katie Bilbeam, and this week we'll be discussing the conflict between Britain and France over weapons contracts to Russia. Plus, Saudi Arabia opens up their stock markets, Coca-Cola loses its Russian fizz, Bitcoin goes sky high, and Tim Kirby, well, he talks about drugs. So stay tuned for the details on all of that. But first, the EU is set to target state-owned Russian banks. The measures will ban European investors from buying new debt or shares of these banks. Access to capital markets, arms and energy technology will likely feature in the new set of EU sanctions. Now, this comes the same week that the fight against secret offshore accounts had some promising results. 37 billion euros was collected by governments across the world, and new details were unveiled of the next phase of the global crackdown on tax evasion, which will allow the automatic sharing of data. But we're now going to discuss how new sanctions and the fight against tax evasion could mean more reason to transport money illegally. Well, I'm now joined by Peter Panoff, the chairman of the board from Trioktoni Group. Hello. So before we move on to tax evasion, because we're going to touch upon that in just a minute or two, we've got these EU sanctions. They're being finalised as we speak. What will they do to the Russian economy?
I don't believe that those sanctions will be at a full scale and too harsh on overall Russian economy. The current belief that mostly and mainly state-owned companies will be targeted. And something else to keep in mind. I mean, Russia is a huge country and the sixth economy in the world. So in any way, if you'd like sanctions to be effective and really cause pain for the economy has to be isolated completely. It's close to impossible to isolate the Russian economy completely from all markets, from all financial markets, from all logistical routes, technology sources, etc. So all these sanctions will only go halfway anyway. And in case of Russia, a big country with a big economy, Russia will definitely retaliate. So the sanctions will be two-way, and Russia will find ways to cause pain for European Union and at some point of time for the United States.
I want to move on to tax evasion because I did mention this week there's been some new measures. We know that there's been a global fight against it. It's about the only thing that international politicians seem to agree on these days. More sanctions, more rules and regulations, that sometimes means the more breaking of them. Do you think that because there are going to be more hurdles, that people will be more inclined to jump over those hurdles and find loopholes to get rid of their money elsewhere, to pop it in a secret safe haven abroad?
If I said it's impossible in Russia, I would not be, honest and frank with you. Definitely it is. But Russian government successfully was fighting against any shadow areas of economy over the last decades. And the current Russian tax regulation is actually targeted towards limit any. It's much more profitable to be open and transparent rather than go into the shadow. So business is very vocal, and Russian government is listening to business, and they're trying to implement measures for de-offshorization or increasing taxes, changing with the very close contact and dialogue with the business. And business is very vocal about saying if you push business too hard, business can go and stop being transparent and go into shadows.
And I suppose both of these topics, sanctions and tax evasion, as far as Russian money is concerned, it all means more money going to Asia.
Most likely. Most likely. I think Russia has a great opportunity to find itself in the Eastern markets, find investors in the Eastern markets, find new partners in the Eastern markets, because unfortunately, I don't want to elaborate on the cause of the sanctions. It's beyond my area of expertise, but I think the message is very strong that under certain circumstances, Western partners can pretty much give up on Russia and drop the contracts, drop prior agreements, and Russia will definitely retaliate short term, because we know sort of rumors that Russia can nationalize some of the assets of international oil and gas companies, including, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, etc. Is going to be very painful.
That would be a disaster, though, wouldn't it?
Well, it will be a disaster for everybody. It's not. Nobody wants this. That's why West should think twice about pushing Russia too hard and too far.
Peter Panoff, thank you so much for coming into the studio
so much.
today.
It was
really
a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Yeah, Sunny. So we appreciate you coming into our little studio right here.
Thank you.
And staying with the conflict surrounding Ukraine, but this time between Britain and France. British Prime Minister David Cameron criticised France for its sale of 2 warships to Russia. But a cross-party parliamentary report later revealed that more than 200 UK licences to sell weapons to Moscow remain intact. So just to give us an idea of how huge the global weapons industry is, we'll have a look at the countries that make the most money. So as you'll be able to see, the US remains the largest exporter of conventional weapons in the world, accounting for 30% just there, or about $7 billion a year. Russia is second with 23%, which is about $4.5 billion a year. Then it's Germany, France and Britain. So considering these numbers, despite all the horror that's happened over the last week or so, it's clear to see why there is so much tension over these multi-billion-dollar contracts. So for more analysis, I'm now joined by Rodney Shakespeare, political analyst from the Global Justice Movement. OK, Mr. Shakespeare, there's lots of pointing and blaming going on at the moment. But in your opinion, politics aside, should arms be stopped to Russia right now?
Well, I don't think you can avoid the politics. I regret the assumption that we should be talking about trade relations and sanctions against Russia. It's not Russia that's conducting a deliberate extermination of the women and children in Gaza. It's not Russia conducting the slaughter of millions, hundreds of thousands perhaps, in Syria and Iraq. And it's not Russia that proposed the elimination of the Russian language for Ukrainian Russian-speaking people. And you notice how the rhetoric is changing on the downing of that plane as people ask the questions as to why the plane was directed over a war zone and why they lowered the altitude of the plane. But to answer your questions as regards sanctions, the reality is that in the long run, the West will lose out on the sanctions. Europe cannot afford sanctions. France can't afford it if it lost that $1.2 billion for those 2 aircraft carriers. The UK is being totally hypocritical. It has 251 ongoing contracts for sniper rifles and drones. And the bottom line, of course, is that Russia can strike back and can nationalise assets of, say, Shell and BP. So I'm afraid all this sanctions talk is going nowhere. It will be a loss to the yachting club down in Cowes and the Isle of Wight, and the Hong Kong yachting club will benefit. But those individual Russians, because that's all sanctions are amounting to, who are sanctioned, will basically wear it as a badge of honour. I happen to think that in this matter, in the long run, the cards are held by Russia.
OK, so in regards to Britain and France going at it this week, do you think, I'm going to presume you're going to say yes, that Cameron has been hypocritical in what he's been saying, given that you said the 251 contracts that are still intact?
Well, it's worse than hypocritical because Cameron is playing the Zionist position and the American Zionist position of the expansion of NATO. Behind this is the putting the pressure onto Russia via expansion of NATO. It was in Georgia, now in Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and of course they're trying to put missiles into Ukraine. That is what is really this is about. So it's worse than hypocrisy. It's about Cameron being part of the NATO expansion, and that's why they're trying to pressurize Russia. But they are losing on this politically, and they are going to lose in the long run, particularly as the BRICS say they've had enough of the West and NATO and decide to make their own arrangements elsewhere.
We'll leave it there, Mr. Shakespeare. Thank you very much indeed for all your thoughts on the topic. Very much appreciated it. And the sky's the limit for Bitcoin. Latvian airline Air Baltic has announced jet setters can start buying their tickets with the virtual currency. Air Baltic is the first airline to offer a Bitcoin payment option. And last month, travel giant Expedia began accepting Bitcoin for hotel bookings, and Cheap Air began accepting the currency for flight bookings. And Saudi Arabia's stock market will open up to foreign investors for the first time. The Saudi market is the biggest in the Middle East and the second biggest in the world that is closed to direct foreign investment. That's after China. The move is part of wider government efforts to diversify the Saudi economy away from oil. And now we're going to talk about corporate news and what's been going on here in Moscow, what has caught my eye. So Coca-Cola has reported a $25 million loss in Russia. The company says this is down to their restructuring its juice-making business in the country. eBay and Post of Russia have signed an agreement aimed at speeding up deliveries. The website's Vice President Wendy Jones hopes the deal will help the company keep up its rapid growth in Russia. Russian metals giant Severstal is finally offloading its US assets. The asset on sales are valued at around $2.3 billion for 5 plants. Time to get over to the business desk and speak to our Tim Kirby. Now, last week, the will, it landed on pills, is that right?
Yes, it did. We got PHS Farm Standard. And to be honest, I never really thought about it, but they actually make a lot of the medicines that people use in Russia. And my wife swears by their immune system booster, Arbidol. But unfortunately, I lost $100. Their stocks went down just a bit. So I'm actually getting a little scared, Katie.
Third week in a row.
Yeah, slowly over time, $100, $100, $100. It's getting whittled down to nothing. But let's see what we have this week. Oh, no, not Rosneft.
Why are you unhappy?
Because they are on the bad end of sanctions, if my memory serves me correct. So I don't know how Rosneft is going to perform. Neft means oil, and they are one of Russia's biggest oil producers. So let's see next week. You never know. Oil is usually pretty reliable, but I don't know.
Okay, so listen, you've got a third week of declines. That's not very good. I can tell that your confidence is definitely wavering a little bit.
Yeah. Last week I felt more confident, but like I said, every week $100 is disappearing. It's not good.
It's not good. So what are you going to do about it?
Well, what am I going to do about it? My destiny's in the wheel, but I think I need to maybe stack the wheel with more guaranteed winners here.
That's cheating.
Yeah, well, the wheel picks, but I pick what goes on the wheel.
Oh, that's
ultimately.
Fair enough. All right then. Okay, fair's fair. All right, well, good luck. Of course, we do have sanctions taking their toll on certain companies, but we'll see how you get on next week. Well done. We're kind of a fourth week of decline, so good luck.
Oh, thank you. I'll need it.
Right, that was Tim. I've been Katie. You've been brilliant. Thank you for joining me, and you can stay tuned to RT for more news updates coming your way next.